How did you feel when the police released that statement on Wednesday?
I just didn't see the purpose. Like, if it furthered the investigation, if there was a reason for it, but it's just victim shaming. And it's like, have we heard about men with erectile dysfunction that drink down the pub going missing? We've never seen that headline. And it just goes to the trope of like the crazy drunk woman. And I've had major, and I've talked about them, major alcohol issues in the past. Does it diminish the importance if I went missing? Does that mean I'm not worth looking for? And it just is an awful thing to do, and it doesn't serve a purpose other than covering their reputation because they've screwed up the investigation. So it doesn't advance it. It's not like all of a sudden she's found. And they have form. When Awami Davies went missing earlier in the year, they arrested 5 people for her kidnapping and murder. Then they said she might be off her meds and drinking. And then she was found not vulnerable and fine. And so they have form of being like, we can't find this person, and it looks like it's our fault because we haven't done our jobs, so we're going to blame them.
I mean, obviously, we don't know all the ins and outs of how the police are conducting this for sort of obvious reasons, but there was certainly a lot of hurt, I think, felt by lots of women, particularly with the menopause being brought into it, because it just felt from a kind of bigger social point of view, we're at the same time trying to have these bigger conversations that, menopause shouldn't be a taboo. It's not like you completely lose your mind when you have the menopause. It's something that, we should start talking about it. We should take the shame and the stigma away from the menopause. And yet suddenly the menopause is brought into the conversation by the police, Jamie.
Yeah, like your colleague Mariella, she does all kinds of work on menopause, and we're finally having progressive, good conversations about supporting women. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh, she's crazy. She went off her menopause meds. She's drunk. She's this. She's that. How does that help us find her? How does it help her family? And that's the whole thing: is we don't do this when it's men. We only do the rollout of the drunk, crazy woman about women.
Karen, let's bring you in. I mean, you're a professor in missing persons studies. What was your reaction to that statement?
First of all, I'm not privy to the information the investigative team has, but there's a couple of things that I would say, just as a counter argument, and it doesn't mean that I disagree with what Jamie was saying, but just for the point of argument, the fact that they self-referred to the IOPC means the press would have gotten hold of that information regardless, and it may be that they decided to come ahead and be upfront about it, just for clarity, just for accountability.
So are you saying that the press, there might have been stories appearing in the press about this?
I think there would have been. I think the second that the press would have gotten hold of that fact, it would have been all over the news. The other thing is that there is a public interest in the fact that people are not completely reassured that there's not been a homicide or an abduction. And so part of that would be to reassure the public that the reason why they're so adamant that they're looking on another avenue, which is the river, either by accident or not, but that it's not a homicide and abduction, and therefore that people across the area are actually safe. So there's a number of different elements to that.
Just on that point, Karen, surely it's not the police's job to just say things to reassure people. They have to sort of operate, along the parameters of fact. And I mean, nobody, obviously we don't, as you correctly say, we don't have all the information that they are privy to. But they sort of rule that out. They seem to rule that out quite quickly.
Again, we don't know why. I can't tell you if they've done the right thing by that, but they've committed to that explanation. And so in all likelihood, they would have looked at various options available as to what had happened.
Okay. And Karen,
ruled out.
In your work, as a professor of doing missing persons studies, how unusual is this case to you from what you know? And in other cases, if the person who went missing was in a high risk group or a vulnerable person, is that information that the police would give out? Is that helpful for people to know from the start?
Again, that depends on on the case, it's a fair question to say, how has that helped the investigation? That the reasons I gave are the ones that came to me as logical.
I guess
But
my question was the timing. So
yes,
why didn't they announce it when she went missing? To do it now, it doesn't help. Like, it doesn't add to anything other than humiliating her family or humiliating her daughters will read that. And it, like, I don't understand the timing.
Okay, Jamie, but do you think there could be any? Because I have seen this, of course, on social media. You have to take on social media with everything with a big, not just a pinch of salt, but a salt mountain of salt. I mean, there were people speculating that actually the press might have got hold of this fact about Nicola Bulley, and were about to run a story, which is why the police released the information. Do you accept that that could have been a possibility?
Yeah, I accept it could have been a possibility, but I also don't think we operate in a place where the press decides what police do, and it's private medical information. And I don't think the menopause should have come into it ever, like ever.
So if let's say, and I agree with you, this would have been pretty awful story to write, but sadly we do know that the press has very good bits of the press and has very bad bits of the press, and it's highly possible that some bits of the press could have got some very personal information about this person. If they had written that up and Nicola Bulley's family wanted to release that information through the police, because I think they're liaising quite closely, I mean, that might have just been a kind of an uncomfortable sort of reality of what they would have had to do.
But you also have to look at if police or members of her family are releasing things that put her in a negative light, why? And I think you have to look at the circumstances, and I have to look at who's releasing that and how it makes them look as opposed to her.
Yeah. I mean, and Karen, the bigger question that Jamie makes, and the wider point that Jamie makes is, to a lot of people on the outside, particularly when trust is very low in the police right now, it does sort of look like this information has possibly been released to kind of sort of give an excuse as to what's happened to her, because the police have closed off another line of argument. I mean, what do you think about that in terms of the trust issue?
I see it slightly different, because we know that there's a large proportion of adults that go missing is due to mental health issues. And so it's within the context of why people go missing in this age group. And what are the circumstances? And we know that life is messy. We know that adults' life is messy. And so I think they were trying to say, look, this is, even though it is a rare case, it is part of what we are dealing with as a missing person investigation in the context of missing population. I see it as, rather than shaming her, as just putting it in context to say she is unlikely to have come to harm by a third party. And I think we can take that in a positive light and actually talk about menopause and talk about alcohol.
If the police had said she's unlikely to have come to harm by a third party 2 weeks ago, I would not have had an issue. It's the way they did it with menopause and with alcohol. And does it make the route back for her harder if she did decide to take a break and leave or make herself unavailable? Does releasing all of this make it harder for her to come back because of humiliation, because of the shaming, because of the context in which it's been put?
I know that is
absolutely. I agree with that. I also think that it's important that actually we have a public conversation about it to reduce the shame and reduce the stigma. It's an opportunity for all of us to talk about it. But the focus of this, of course, is to try and find her.
And Karen, just give our listeners a bit of a figure, because you obviously study this for a living. This is what you do. In terms of the, how common or how uncommon is it for somebody, of Nicola Bulley's age and, a woman to go missing? What are the stats like? And what is there a sort of pattern that you've seen from the work that you've done?
So this age group is actually men that are a bit more likely to go missing than women. The absolute vast majority of anyone going missing is that they return within 48, 72 hours. 90% of cases are closed within a week. So just the length of time already makes it quite a rare case. Like I said, there's a big proportion of people going missing due to mental health issue, and about 4% of anyone who goes missing comes to harm. So when we look at the harm, be it death or injury, it's either accident, suicide, third party. I don't think I'm missing anything, but it's those three are the major areas, and those are the three that the police from the outset said we are looking at those avenues and trying to decide which of them is likely to have happened. And of course, injury is part of that as well.
And from the work you've done as well, what are the things that help somebody be found either by the police or somebody else, or help that person come back home? Is it appeals from the family? Is it the police making appeals? Or is it a slightly more low-key approach? What have you found from your work?
So the majority of people actually return from their own accord. They just decide to come back when they do. Other factors that lead to people being found is police. Members of the public are very helpful, which is why there's release of information to the public from time to time. Not all cases, of course, make such a big public impact. And others are just by coincidences, people see on CCTV and so on. But generally, it's either
It's
by their own
worth saying that Mariana is a 9-year-old that went missing from Bermondsey February 9th, and there's not been a headline. So there's so many cases of missing women and girls that we never, ever hear about. And some of the attention should really be spread to making sure all women and girls are safe.
Yeah, and that is a very, very important point. And why do you think, Jamie, this case is something, one that it's got high media value? What is it that makes some cases more, and I put worthy in inverted commas, worthy of media attention and public attention, and others not?
Well, we did 20 years of Maddie McCann. It is white women of a certain socioeconomic standard that this country blows up about when they are in danger and not available. Obviously, I am one of the people that got involved after Sarah was killed, and I related to her. But in the work I've done, realizing the headlines that didn't happen for Biba and Nicole, that we fought to get Sabina Nessa any coverage. And the idea that they were doing the right thing, they're the right kind of woman, and that prostitutes' lives aren't valued. I think we have to value women's lives and the danger that we're often in across society.
And Karen, do you agree with what Jamie's just said? Because it does feel that some cases get a lot of media attention and others cases just go completely under the radar.
Absolutely, and there is racial bias. We know that from studies from Canada, US. We've done a couple as well. There's also kind of class bias. There are biases. There's, like you say, about the worthy victim, the worthy missing person. That the more innocent, the more we can relate to that person, the more attention it gets. And in this case, is ideal in that sense. It fits all the criteria. Most of us walk the dog, put the kids at school. So it's very, very relatable.
And there is this thing, isn't there? There's the good victim and the other victims. I just want to read 2 text messages we've had in, and then I want to ask you both a final question quickly before we get to the news. 2 different views on the menopause. Helen has messaged in saying, I don't understand why menopause is being linked to shame. These were given facts, not shaming or blaming. And then Joe has messaged in saying, listening to Times Radio discussing the Nicola Bulley case, I can't see any reason why the police would reveal inappropriate information about relating to the menopause or alcohol use. There is no evidence suggesting any connection between the two. I think that is an important point there, Joe. But also, I just wanted to ask you both. I mean, we've just been talking about biases, particularly in terms of, who goes missing and victims of, we don't know if this is a crime, but let's say people that go missing. There's some other biases going on and a bit of sexism that I've detected. A couple of commentators, Amanda Platel, for example, did a tweet about Detective Superintendent Rebecca Smith yesterday at the press conference. She is the female superintendent. She's leading this investigation. And they made some comments about what she was wearing. Amanda Platel tweeted, "Skin-tight navy dress, stilettos, poker straightened hair, whatever happened to a cop uniform? Or is she auditioning for Love Island for midlifers? Show some respect for a missing mother." Now, the police have come under a lot of criticism, Jamie, for their handling. But this Detective Superintendent Rebecca Smith is also getting a lot of sexism as well.
It's amazing to me that police forces recognize misogyny when it's done to them, but they fail to recognize it on their forces and in the institution that they work for. Like the Platel thing is Disney level crap. It's absolutely horrible. But every police person pointing to it as being the most awful thing. No, look at what institutional misogyny is doing. I don't care about a Daily Mail tweet.
But doesn't it also show that, we know that, I mean, Julie Etchingham did this really interesting documentary last week looking at the real sexism that women face within the police service, the women who are trying to get on and do the right thing in a very dominant patriarchal society. I mean, we're absolutely not saying this is the worst thing that's ever happened, but it's pretty depressing when you have a senior woman in the police force and this is how she's getting spoken about.
100%, but West Mercia, where the whistleblower was, her chief constable blocked her on Twitter and is saying there's a cold place in hell for women that don't support women. But she didn't support a whistleblower that was sexually assaulted on her force. So, look at your own houses, get your houses in order. Looking at the tweet as a distraction from what the Lancs police have done, I'm much more concerned about what the police have done than Daily Mail journalists getting some clickbait.